collaboratrice presso questa istituzione e sono davvero molto felice di dare il benvenuto a David Coulson. Welcome, David. Thank you for being here at Castello di Rivoli. It's really a pleasure. Questo è l'ultimo appuntamento della giornata che abbiamo dedicato, no? La 18ª giornata del contemporaneo di Amaci e di Amaci, Associazione dei Musei d'Arte Contemporanea Italiani, è realizzata con il sostegno della Direzione Generale Creatività Contemporanea del Ministero della Cultura e la collaborazione della Direzione Generale per la Diplomazia Pubblica e Culturale del Ministero degli Affari Esteri e della Cooperazione Internazionale. Scusate, ho pensato di leggerla tutta. Bene. David Coulson è un ospite molto speciale per noi, che è arrivato per questa conferenza da Nairobi, dove nel 1996 fonda la fondazione Tara. Coulson nasce come fotografo e scrittore e esperto di pittura rupestre ed è anche tra gli ospiti di Espressioni con Frazioni e potrete vedere, se non avete avuto occasione oggi, le sue opere allestite nella sala 18. Come dicevo, il grande merito di David Coulson è proprio di aver fondato nel 96, assieme all'archeologa e paleoantropologa inglese Mary Leakey, Tara, che è una fondazione, Trust for African Rock Art, che ha l'obiettivo di salvaguardare i siti più minacciati dall'essere umano e dalla natura e di favorire la divulgazione e la conoscenza di questo patrimonio. Tara si occupa di archiviare pitture rupestri, incisione, tracce di inestimabile valore sul territorio africano. Attraverso l'archiviazione dei siti rupestri presenti sul continente africano, Tara promuove e sostiene l'attuazione di misure per la loro conservazione, operando anche a stretto contatto con le comunità locali e naturalmente anche con enti del patrimonio nazionale e internazionale, incluso l'UNESCO. A partire dal 95, cioè l'anno prima della fondazione di Tara, già Coulson ha condotto numerose esplorazioni in regioni dell'Africa, l'Algeria, le catene montuose del Tibet, in Chad, l'Egitto, la Libia, i monti Atlas in Marocco, la Namibia, il massiccio dell'Arin Nigeria, il Sudafrica, lo Zimbabwe e numerose spedizioni nel deserto del Sahara. Davvero quello che vedremo è un operato straordinario. È anche autore di pubblicazioni, tra cui African Rock Art Painting and Engraving on Stone con Alec Campbell, e ha ricevuto il supporto e il riconoscimento di prestigiose istituzioni come la Ford Foundation, l'Andrew Mellon Foundation e la National Geographic Society. Recentemente ha curato e coordinato l'acquisizione di 280.000 immagini di Tara per il British Museum di Londra, che sono ora accessibili sul sito del museo, per cui potete anche vedere questo anche stasera. Nel giugno del 2022, per questo inestimabile contributo alla documentazione dell'arte rupestre, è insignito da Sua Maestà la Regina dell'onorificenza MBA, Member of the British Empire, membro dell'impero britannico. Ora sono lieta di passare la parola a David Coulson e la sua conferenza intitolata David Coulson e la pittura rupestre in Africa tra fotografia e archiviazione, che si terrà in lingua inglese. Grazie. Thank you, David. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. This, for me, is a story of a love affair with Africa, but of course it has also become a love story with Africa's past. And in this picture here, you can see me standing with Alec Campbell, who sadly died a few years back, but he was a lovely man, immensely knowledgeable about Africa, particularly interested in Africa's past. and he was the co-author of a book. I'm afraid I haven't got a copy of it here, but you'll see a picture in the next screen of that book, which was just called Africa's Rock Art. It was published in New York. So, and I should just say that the rock engravings that we're standing next to here, we call them the crying cows, because the idea being that they were right next to a dry pool, a pool that, because it's in the Sahara Desert, is dry 90% of the time. But the sort of the thought amongst the local people was that when the cattle came down to drink, there was no water there, and these tears coming from their eyes. But it's one of the most spectacular pieces of ancient art anywhere in the world, and it's been done with bas-relief, bas-relief technique that even you couldn't match it today. It's such a spectacular thing. Anyway, so let me take you into where we go now. Now, I mentioned the rock art book. You can actually see it on the left-hand side of the screen, and that was published a few years ago, and that was the first book on the rock art of the entire continent of Africa. But the other books there are just to show you how I sort of started, because I was a photographer, and I went to Africa and I fell in love with it, and I took more and more pictures. And then I came back to Europe, and I sort of thought, well, this is rather boring. I wish I was back in Africa. And so I decided to just try my luck. I put together an idea for 2 or 3 books of some of the places I'd been to, and took them to the Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany at the time. And I got my first commission, for the first of several commissions. And the first one was a book it's called Mountain Odyssey, and it was about a 30,000-mile solo journey I did through 7 different Southern African countries. And that was the first time that I became acquainted with rock art. Now, it goes without saying that Africa is very much a multicultural continent. So I've just given you a few of many, many examples. And it's certainly been my incredible pleasure and privilege to have worked with and lived with some of these people who are just fantastic people. You can see here in the next picture with the map roughly how rock art is distributed through the continent. I mean, that's obviously at a very basic level, but broadly speaking, you can see immediately that most of the rock art is in the north as well as in the south of the continent. However, we've now worked in sort of about 25, 23, 24, 25 countries out of the probable 30 countries in Africa which have rock art. In this next picture, you can see Alec Campbell, who was my co-author, and in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see what is the oldest rock art so far recorded on Earth. It's that particular piece, which was found by a friend of mine from Cambridge University in England, has been dated at 70,000 years. Since that was discovered, he found another piece, another site, very close to the first site, where they got a date for 77,000. And that's sort of right out there. And here we're looking out of a cave in this area, which is in the southeastern part of the Cape. Now, this particular painting was one of the first rock paintings we ever saw and recorded. And it's in the southwestern Cape. And I put it on because it's also, in a way, exemplifies or epitomizes the specialness of rock art. I mean, right across the continent, although you can't compare these different ancient cultures precisely, but all of them are exciting in different ways. And we call these particular, we have sort of names for these particular creatures in rock art that are basically, as you can see, half human and half animal. And there are, even today, you can talk to the San, that's the Bushman, whose ancestors would have done this work, and they will talk in terms of these beings, which really belong to the afterlife, and it's how one of the ways in which they present their ancestors after death, and they become these joyful creatures that are both man and animal, which also really underscores their respect, the Bushman's respect for wildlife, because they consider the animals as really equal to them. The Bushman's got a great sense of humor, but whether this is the result of humor or error, we'll never know. But it's a very little known painting which shows probably a Portuguese galleon in the 1400s. And you can see there with the flags flying, and you can see the flags are flying in different directions, which is nice. And it's in a range of mountains called the Cederberg, which I knew very well. When I did my first book, it was on the mountains, as I say, of southern Africa, and I got to know these places very well at the time. Probably the richest part of South Africa, well, southern Africa, for rock art is called the Drakensberg, the Dragon Mountains, which are in sort of along the border of Zululand and Natal, and they're quite high mountains. They go up to about 3,500 meters, I think, 3,500, 4,000 meters. And here, where we're not that high, you can see the high mountains behind, but you can see that there's a huge, great overhang there. There's a waterfall tumbling down about 15 meters. And in that one cave, and this is an example behind me of the paintings there, in that one cave, there are over 1,000 paintings. These particular ones have been dated to about 3,000 years of age. These are from the same area, and for us, they're particularly interesting because I've already mentioned and shown you an example of those creatures in mythology and afterlife, who are both half man and half animal. This is the same sort of thing. On the left there, you can see that the two figures are actually not human. If you look carefully, the left-hand figure has got like a pig's head and hasn't got proper hands or feet, and the same on the right. But the right figure is particularly interesting because you can see how it's got like almost feathers all the way along its body. It's got it's got hooves rather than feet, and it's got a sort of more of an animal's head. And these are creatures which are associated with trance. And I mentioned trance because although it was probably a feature of sort of cultural feature of many different peoples in Africa, it does seem to be particularly strong and important with the Bushman or San people of southern Africa, who had a very, very complex and interesting mythology. As soon as we see that type of situation, we know we're talking about trance. This is a representation of trance. And I myself have attended trance dances often in the Kalahari Desert, and we've danced around the fires, and these people are you know, they're almost possessed, but it's interesting that they never take drugs. There's no drugs attached to this. They literally get high by dancing around the fire because of the singing, the rhythmic singing. That's how they become sort of turned on. And during these trances, healing takes place. I mentioned the Kalahari Desert, which is mainly in Botswana. This is a picture taken in northern Botswana. And these hills at the back are called the Sedilo Hills. And the rock art of this area was relatively little known until Alec Campbell and I worked here. And we first worked here in the 80s. And it's a beautiful area. It's got fantastic art. You can see an example of an oryx, painting of an oryx immediately behind me. And it's now a World Heritage, UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is in the Sedilo Hills here. You can see this shelter and 3 bushmen standing there. Today, you wouldn't see San or bushmen like this anymore. This is something of the past. And you can see that some of the paintings, perhaps, on the walls, you can see there's a variety of things. You can see an animal there, and you can probably see some geometrics. And you're going to see several examples, a number of examples of geometric art, which doesn't just occur in Africa. You get it in other parts. I think you get it in America. You get it in probably France too. I'm sure you get it in France. And certainly in Africa, I can't speak for the other continents, but in Africa, it's probably associated with trance. There's a lot of meaning in those geometrics, but unfortunately, we will never know because that past has gone. People today can't tell you what it is, but we know that there were powerful messages, and these signified a lot of important things. But that's all we can really say now. That's an example. These are not really true geometrics, but you can see how there appear to be animals, footprints, and these infilled circles and things. That for me, that's one of the most extraordinary sights. And we've never actually, I don't think we've ever published this picture. Namibia is on the western coast of southern Africa, and this is taken on a volcano that's about 3,000 meters high, 3,500 meters. And this is in one of the valleys leading up to some fantastic sites. It's called the Brandberg or Fire Mountain. And these are all on the Brandberg. And this one on the left is very inaccessible. I was a lot younger and able to do more rock climbing in those days. I don't think I'd be able to do that now. What you're looking at on the left is what I believe it is that you can see a white neck of a giraffe, and you can see its head facing right. And so it's almost as if it's coming out of cloud. You see with the sort of lighter area, the giraffe's appearing out of cloud. And you can see its head to the right, and it's got horns, which giraffes do have, and it's being approached by three figures. And it's probably a rainmaking. I can't go into that level of detail, but we'll be coming back to the importance of giraffes later when we get to the Sahara. But it's a very magical scene, and the figure on the extreme right has got a snake in his belly, and he's got a crescent-tipped arrows, which are very significant. The bottom right-hand picture, it was called in the 1930s by the great French rock art expert. It was called the White Lady of the Brandberg. You can see like a figure with white legs and like a glass of wine, striding forward. Very, very controversial. Nobody believes it's really of a white lady today, but it's too long a story to go into now. But it's a very fine painting. And above is a rock engraving site that is in its own right a World Heritage Site in Namibia called Tweefontein. And there are a number of really, really fine, probably about 4,000 years old. And you can see in the top right a magnificent rhino. Then crossing another border in southern Africa into Zimbabwe. This is a scene in southern Zimbabwe, one of many beautiful wilderness areas. And this site is also a World Heritage Site because of its rock art. And you can see a picture again I took of a wild bushman many years ago. And there's still a lot of the local people have Bushman or San blood in them. And it's an incredibly rich area for rock art. I've just given you 4 different examples this isn't just from the Matobo area, but it's from Zimbabwe. And often people say to me, ask me, where do you think the best rock art is in Africa? And it's an impossible question, and you can't ask or answer questions like that. But I sometimes say, well, actually, Zimbabwe has some of the most incredible art we've ever seen anywhere. On the top left, you've got an ant bear, sometimes called an aardvark, which lives underground. And that was special for the Bushmen. Anything that lived underground was in the sort of spirit world. And you can see it's surrounded by dots, which has been interpreted as sort of power, a power symbol. These are paintings of fish, like 500 kilometers, 600 kilometers from the ocean. And you know, they're quite large. They're sort of, one of those is about 1 meter long, very rare and very significant spiritually. In the top right, you've got an exquisitely beautiful zebra, although he's probably only about 20 centimeters long, and you can see a warthog down here. But perhaps the most impressive and beautiful painting of all that we've recorded in Zimbabwe, if not, you know, most of Africa, is this figure. And if I can help you to understand what you're looking at, there's a figure reclining on his elbow, his or her elbow, and you can see that there are dots all over his body. He's got one knee raised. He's got an erect penis, and there are various floating figures which suggests, again, a trance scene. But most important of all, the human figure hasn't got a human head. It's got an antelope head again, like we were talking about earlier. All those dots are definitely connected with trance, we believe. And that figure is about 2 meters long in real life. And below it are hundreds and hundreds of figures processing, very beautifully drawn. I mean, it's one of the most extraordinary sites I think you could find anywhere in the world. And it's definitely several thousand years old. Moving north to Tanzania, we've been very involved in an area of Tanzania that is on the western side of the Great Rift Valley, just north of sort of the center of Tanzania. And it's an area known as Kondoa, after a town that is out there somewhere. And it's thanks to our efforts, it is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We've partnered for years with UNESCO in Paris. And this just gives you an idea of the country it's in. Here you can see several of the paintings. This is actually reproduction by our founding patron, Mary Leakey, the famous paleontologist who died some years back now. And on the left is a Sandawe woman who we believe is a direct descendant of the people who did these paintings. And genetic studies have been done on the Sandawe, which connect them, connect them 10,000 years ago, but connect them with the San, the Bushmen. which is interesting because the style of art, broadly speaking, is very similar to the Bushman art. So I just want to point out the middle painting at the top. There's a child or a woman or with some huge bonnet or hat, and there are bees, masses of bees all the way around. Bees are very important where Bushmen are concerned, and were considered to be related to trance. They occur in a lot of the paintings, trance-related paintings as well. This lovely picture at the bottom shows people swimming, apparently people swimming by the river. Also in the same area, this picture of a kudu antelope being confronted by a man with a bow and arrow, a hunter. But it would be a mistake to think it's a hunting scene. Generally speaking, whether it's Sandawi art or Bushman art, rock art should never be taken literally. You know, it's there for its meaning, and obviously the more one learns about Bushman beliefs or in this case Sandawi beliefs, the more chance you have of guessing more correctly. But we will never know. You can't know exactly what was intended here. I mean, my point is that you would never get a situation like this. It's not a real life situation. A hunter would never get so close to a kudu, and that's a clue. So now we arrive at my country where I live, in Kenya. This is in the north of Kenya, a very beautiful, quite remote area in the Great Rift Valley. And this is Lake Turkana, it's a very volcanic area. There's a volcanic island across there called South Island. And there are many sites which we've recorded. And the two on the left are in that part of Kenya. This one, Kangatit, you see spirals, whether it's with the Bushman art or some of the Batwa art in this area, are you know, they have a lot of meaning, a lot of power in them. Now I've mentioned the Batwa, so this is a new group of people who left rock art right through Central Africa. There's quite a lot of it in Kenya, and Uganda is full of it. Then across to Gabon, there's masses of it too. Sadly, of course, we don't know the meaning of it. We just know that these were very important symbols at the time. And this, from behind here, it looks like it's a different. They're probably also a forest forager people in the forests, because most of Kenya, if you go back 3,000 years, was forested. Today, that's of course not the case. So two more really important panels which are next to each other. These are actually all part of the same shelter. And you can see there's a red elephant on the left, and these are actually cattle. They look almost like horses, but they're, and it's an amazing sight. We sort of put that forward to be a national monument many years ago, which it has been ever since. How old are they? We don't frankly know, but there's reason to believe that they're several thousand years old. Over the border from there being Western Kenya, that last picture, over the border, this is Uganda, and there's a site here, a cave up there on the right, and this white painting here is on the roof of the cave. It's about sort of nearly a meter across, and we showed the picture at the time to the National Museum there, and they adopted it as their logo. Now moving further to the east, but northeast, near Ethiopia, this is Somaliland. And this is an extraordinary site. It's called Lasgil. And the main subject matter in these paintings, which have been dated up to about 7,000 years, the main subject matter is cattle. And you can see they're very stylized. You can see how they have these portrayed as having these very thick necks, but almost no head at all. It's like a tiny little perfunctory head, and then big horns and so on. And it's you know, nobody knows. I mean, we can only guess at the meaning of some of these things, but it's very difficult to guess. But in terms of its art value, it's really extraordinary. I think it's one of the most extraordinary sites on the continent. That just shows you the setting in the top right there. And also in that part of northeastern Africa, you've got Ethiopia, of course. Ethiopia has a lot of art and mainly rock engravings. Paintings are pretty rare there, but it also has these megaliths, monoliths, and this is a particularly special one that's about 2.5 meters high, and it's absolutely covered in engravings. So now I'm going to move across the continent to Nigeria, because for years we didn't work in Nigeria, and then suddenly we gave a conference, a conservation conference in Morocco back in 2015, and at that conference we learned about the so-called cross-river monoliths, which are anthropomorphic monoliths, very beautifully carved, and I was absolutely stunned by it, because I would really say that outside ancient Egypt, I've never seen a quality anyway. You'll see an example in a minute, but this is just to show you the setting, the landscape there, looking into Cameroon. It's sort of not far from the Cameroon border. And here are two examples of these monoliths, which are carved in granite. Interestingly enough, they're never the same, you know. I can think of other examples where, you know, they're almost exactly the same every time they make them. But these have all got their own like personality. And the other really special thing, because we did our first trip in 2016, I think it was, and then when we were supported by the Prince Claus Fund of Amsterdam, and then when we ran out of money there, the American embassy came in and they funded, and we worked there for about 5 years. And when we first came, we were told there were about 200 of these monoliths left, and in those 5 years we pushed that number up to 400. But a lot of them have been removed, illegally sold, and have turned up in all sorts of interesting top museums in the world, and so that's part of a longer story. But we were very interested to see that the local people, even today, respect them and respect the power of these. And we, you know, for example, you'd often find, if you look at the one on the left there on the ground, we'd find a little offering of palm wine, you know, which indicates there's obviously a human association and respect going on. That's an example on the left, which that is now in the Louvre in Paris, and is one of the sort of controversial stones. And whereas the one on the right shows you the context. I mean, that's in its right context. And this one on the left was sold in London at Sotheby's or Christie's, I think, for big money. We don't know where it came from yet. And the one on the right is in its right situ. So now we've reached the Sahara. The Sahara is roughly the same size as North America. It's completely vast. And one of the reasons why I did the book I did on the rock art was it was a fantastic opportunity to, you know, explore the Sahara. This is in Egypt, in the Great Sand Sea, where we traveled for 1,000 miles, whatever that is in kilometers, without seeing a single living soul. And it's been one of my greatest personal adventures in my lifetime, exploring this. This picture is in Niger, and it shows the camel caravans moving across an ancient river valley. We counted about 1,000 camels in this camel train. And at this point, I'm going to share with you the greatest discovery that we've been involved in ever, which happened when I was National Geographic have funded a lot of our expeditions, okay? And this was on one of the expeditions that they funded. And as you can see, I've written this article on these giraffes. What you're looking at is 2 life-size giraffe carvings on the top of a rocky outcrop, not very high, as you can see. You can see my friend Alec Campbell, the co-author of our book, and my founding trustee, and our great Tuareg friend who showed us how to get here. These are estimated at least 7,000 years old. I could say a lot about it, but you can always perhaps ask me at the end. I mean, they're truly extraordinary. This must have been a very, very important site. And if you think that there was only one, because I know this area very well, there's only one possible place where you could have made a carving like this, and that was here, because it was a fit, complete fit. And you know, we've looked at many, many other outcrops and so on, and it was done by, it's a masterpiece. It was done by somebody who I think was deeply, intimately connected with nature, but also somebody who respected the power of the giraffes as he or she saw it. And we will never know exactly what they thought, but there is huge evidence that early peoples right across the African continent respected and believed in the power of the giraffe, and it was probably something to do with rainmaking. Also in northern Niger, these figures, which date from, we think, about 3,000 years ago, a time when there was a warlike tribe called the Garamantes who had chariots, which they'd got originally from the Egyptians. And this, we believe, is earlier than that. We don't know who, no idea who might have done it. You're looking at a larger than life-size lion there. And if you look at the way the jaw is presented, it's like, there's an element of Picasso there, you know. And you can see it apparently is being hunted by horsemen, warriors on horseback. Also in the similar part of the Sahara, you can see a human figure there for scale. This is the sort of country, and on these rocky outcrops, you know, we find engravings like this. You see there's like a warrior, probably in sort of leather gear with spears, and that round thing would be a shield. And the rather strange spaceman-like headgear is, you know, is probably just, shall I say, tribal headgear, paraphernalia. Moving to the west, into Morocco, to that part of the Sahara, i.e. to the east of the Atlas Mountains. All these 3 pictures are taken at a fantastic site where we've done a lot of work. And the wonderful geometric, extraordinary elephant. The dates for these are about 5,000 years, 5,000 or 6,000 years. what they're believed to be. And from the same, you can actually see that replicated, that elephant bottom right. But you can see that white rhino. We call them the white rhino. They're not white. It's because they they have a wide jaw, and the Dutch for that was wit, and that's why they were called white rhino. And until I showed this picture to wildlife colleagues who are some of the experts, Pan-African, right across Africa on rhino, they had no idea there were ever rhino here, and yet they're very common, those engravings. And southern Algeria, if you ask me a question and said, where is the finest rock art? Probably in the world, but let's just say Africa for the time being. It's in southern Algeria. Unfortunately, because of the security situation, for years it hasn't been possible to get to these sites. But what you're looking at there it's a figure that's known locally as Le Grandier de Safar. Safar is the name of this remote mountain place. It's quite high, this plateau, and that figure stands about 3.5 meters tall and has been scientifically dated at 10,000 years. And I think it's one of the greatest paintings on this earth. It's the most incredible sight, and there are many others too, which we've published. And I'm hoping to go back next year to this region, but I know I'll probably never be able to get back here for various reasons, but I've been there. And here you are, we saw that this is the picture at the beginning, and this is in the same, it's not very far away from the last picture of the great god of Safar, and just the most wonderful, wonderful sight. And here also from southern Algeria, just some more variety for you. The top right-hand picture of the chariot belongs to a later period. Top left, we think you're talking about 7,000 years. Probably the same for this Matisse, similar to Matisse, this amazing painting here. And to the left, I believe that's very early too. I think that's probably about 8,000 or 9,000. And the chariot, top right, belongs to I think I mentioned earlier to you about warriors on chariots coming in from Egypt. And anyway, that belongs to that period. This is in Libya. Again, luckily, I was able to do a lot of work in Libya before the Troubles. These figures who are sort of come from a vanished mythology and stand probably about 1.5 meters high. We believe that they're in the region of 9,000 years, and they could be 10. And they stand right at the top of a cliff at the side of a riverbed, and it's one of the most spectacular images you'll ever see. This, which National Geographic did a very nice pull-out image of this some years back, but this is, as you can see, a frieze of running giraffe, and with about 25 giraffe or something like that, and which we think are about 6,000 years. And from a similar area, there's this life-size crocodile engraved on the rocks next to a dry riverbed here. This is now further to the east of Algeria and of Libya. This is an area called the Enedi Mountains, which are quite close to the south of Libya, quite close to Sudan. And those are larger than life-size human figures who appear to be ladies, although they have no breasts, but most elaborate body decoration, as you can see, and one of the most extraordinary things we've ever seen anywhere in Africa. And I just show this because friends of mine, Angela Fisher and Carol Beckwith, who I've worked with a lot over the years, have done books that some of you may have seen on African ceremonies, and the picture on the left is one of their pictures showing body decoration taking place in southern Ethiopia, but it makes an interesting comparison with the figures, because this is now a detail on the right from the last picture you saw. And also very common in the Unedi Massif are camels and running camels. And this, it's almost, you can see a whole lot of running camels here. And the warriors are painted red and appear to have sort of swords or something there on the far side, and long spears. The art in the Unedi is probably a lot more recent. You know, it might be more like 3,000 years, something like that. This is also in the Unedi, and it appeared, as you can see, on a French stamp in the 1950s or 60s, and it apparently, you know, shows a musician playing a Theban harp for a lady who's seated there. Very beautiful picture. Some of you here might have seen the movie The English Patient some years ago with Kirsten Scott Thomas and so on, which was quite a major movie at the time. And that in that movie, they featured a cave where the heroine, in that case, Kirsten Scott Thomas, was making paintings, or I think copying paintings in a cave. And that cave's called the Cave of Swimmers. And the cave in the movie was not the real cave. That was 1,000 miles further north. This is the real cave because it is, as I say, it's based on a true story. And it's full of, I think there's probably a picture here of these are some of the paintings in the cave. And it's called the Cave of Swimmers because of these little, let me just see, these little swimming figures here, do you see? And there are some up at the top too, which we believe are probably represent spirits of people that have passed on or something. We don't believe they're real swimmers because rock art is generally not about reality as we know it. Just, I thought it would interest you to see some of the stone tools that we just find every day. When we photograph them, we find them out in the middle of nowhere. Those are little arrowheads, Neolithic arrowheads, about 20 centimeters long, approximately. And that is a beautiful blade there, which could be much, much older. That could be about 60,000 years on the left. And these are just lying in the desert. I mean, there's nobody there. And a whole lot of other tools you can see up on the right there. And also pottery. So you've got more stone artifacts that we've come across and photographed. And interestingly enough, I was told by an international expert on pottery, that the pottery here, which would probably include some of that you see, is as old as the oldest otherwise known pottery in the world, which comes from Japan. And interesting statistic in terms of the Sahara's past. It's just this particular trip we did, we traveled 1,000 miles without seeing a single living soul. There's another picture at the beginning of this trip we had that you saw. When we were on our way to the Cave of Swimmers when we took that picture. And that just shows me consulting a map just on the sand, you know, and you can imagine it's a bit of a waste of time when you haven't got many choices or you've got all the choices in the world. And this is just, you know, traveling the Sahara, how we got there. This team here, we traveled a lot in a very remote area where you can't take vehicles. And we've made some amazing recordings but driving in those conditions is quite a skilled business. This was another picture of mine that was in National Geographic as a double-page spread some years ago, and it's in Niger. And again, the Tuareg on the top left, he's sort of like half my brother, half my son. I mean, we traveled so often, just the two of us, to very remote places. Unfortunately, he was involved in a terrible accident, but he's alive, but he's not the same man as he was, but a lovely guy. And these people on the top right, the Wadabi, they're also known as the Pearl locally, and they have a famous dance where the men dance for the women and the women choose their husbands who are for being the best dancers. And that's them doing the dance, and you can see them at a ceremony. These are Tuareg elders and things on the left. And the picture in the bottom right, I took in 1996 in Chad at a volcanic crater in the Tibesti Mountains. And these were some wild fellows we met. That's a Tubu from Chad. They're the equivalent to the Tuareg over in that part of the Sahara. Otherwise, these are the Tuareg on the right. A guy we've traveled with an enormous amount, Sheikh, who's an Algerian Tuareg, and so on. It just gives you, and these are beautiful women at a dance that we attended. In terms of conservation threats, you know, we've covered one or two of them already. That shows you, this is in sort of near Laskil in Somaliland. You saw paintings earlier of cattle, and we talked about them. These are in the same style, and they're very, very rare. And this is the only place we've ever seen this as an engraving, a rock engraving. And you can see that they've been badly vandalized, and there's really very little, I'm afraid, that we can do. But at least the main site, I think, will become soon, depending on the sort of legal situation of Somaliland as a nation, it'll become a World Heritage Site. That is just an example of one of a number of rock art conservation conferences we've organized. This one, two of them have been hosted by the Moroccan government. And so you can see us all sitting around as one of our long-time staff members on the community project side. And this is us on various missions. This was actually during a conference, top right, in Morocco. This is in Niger, traveling with a great friend of mine who was a rebel leader when I first met him and is now the Minister of State under the president in Niger. This on the bottom left is with Alec looking at those. Do you remember we looked at the rock paintings of those strange, like footprint type of things on the bottom left? This shows the setting of that. And here I am with the American ambassador in Niger visiting a rock art site with a rather Christ-like looking figure there. So that's it for now. This is Nelson Mandela wrote me a letter before he died, in which he described Africa's rock art as the common heritage of humankind. So, thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for this very, very interesting walk or into this incredible work you've been doing since so long. And I think that also the audience is quite surprised and with a huge desire of visiting and seeing somehow, no, these unbelievable sites. I would like to ask to the public if they have questions, of course, and maybe I would like first to something myself to David. I take the opportunity to be the one with the microphone. So, David, something that really I didn't get, it's you did a lot of expedition, but how an expedition begins? From what exactly? From the discovery, from some paleoanthropology discoveries? How an expedition to go to a place and decide to photography? How this start in your practice?
Okay, can happen in many different ways. And I'm like in the case of the Sahara, I, you know, we have there's a network of people, you know, who work. I mean, you know, I've got French friends, I've got Italian friends. I mean, a great friend we've worked with a lot in Libya is a guy called Sabino Dell'Uomo from the University of Rome, Sapienza, and we've done a lot with him. But so we have our network of friends, and through them, you know, we have conversations around the campfire or whatever, and somebody says, but you know, apparently there's such and such at such a place, you know, and you think, okay, well, we'll do that next year, or we'll do that, you know. So that's obviously one way in which it happens. I mean, we hear of things, and that's part of the excitement for me, you know, going for these new things. I mean, I can remember talking to somebody in Chad. I know. I used to know an old explorer who crossed the empty quarter in Saudi Arabia, like in the 1950s. He's long dead. But before I went to Chad the first time, he was still alive. And I talked to him about those mountains. You saw some pictures. You saw those armed Tubu around the crater there, you know, and for example. And he said, you know, on one of my trips there, he said we found some crocodile in the mountains. Crocodile, you know. I mean, it's in the Sahara, and he said yes, it was a desert spring. And anyway, and I said, well, I'm quite sure they're not there now. And he said, well, you know, and he gave me some information, and he said it's worth finding out and checking. And anyway, fast tracking, we found them, and I think they probably are finished now because I don't know what happened, but anyway, we sat there and it was incredibly exciting, and these crocodiles came out when the sun came up and warmed up the pool and the rocks. These crocodiles came out. I mean, that was amazing, but it's an example of how you get information. If I hadn't had that conversation with old Wilfred Thesiger, we would never have known. We would never have looked. But it's exchange of information between friends, but it's also the interest in finding something and recording something and wanting to know if there are other examples of that, you know, because that's how it goes. And I mean, so that I hope partly answers that question.
Yes.
And what was your other question?
No, this
That
was
it, right? Okay.
yeah. How an expedition start by.
Yeah. But I think, you know, the more we know, there's that desire to know more, and you think, well, I've never seen one like that before, and then you start mentioning it, and maybe somebody says they do, or maybe he says, why don't you go and talk to so and so, you know, like.
Wow, sounds really challenging. So, thank you, thank you. So, se il pubblico ha qualcosa da chiedere, naturalmente sono sicura che David sarà felice di rispondervi. Prego. C'è anche un ragazzo, sì.
Hi, I'd like to ask how much it's important the help to the local people when you go around, and I'd like to ask nowadays, how is the relationship to the local people, to the art, painting, if it's just the part of the past for the local people, or nowadays it's still an important thing for their culture. I don't know if it's.
I can't quite hear that, so you can, yeah.
He asked you how important was the collaboration of local people, the people from the territory where you went for the expedition, the importance of the relationship with the local people.
Okay. That's something that evolves over years. I mean, for example, I mentioned the chap, I said, it was like my son, my brother. I mean, but the way it began for us in Niger, we've been going for years and years and years. The man who I said now is the president's right-hand man, I met him when he was a rebel leader, and he had no money. And I said, well, you've got lots of weapons. Why don't you just be our guards and take us into the... So he did. But that was the beginning of a long association with his family and meeting new people. I mean, for us, for Niger, it's like one big family. I mean, and that's not just because we've helped them, but they're lovely people. I mean, they're so welcoming. The Wadabi we don't know so well. I mean, those dances are done obviously for the tourists, but they earn money from them, so it's important for them. But I have a great friend who's done the definitive book on the Wadabi. We know a lot of people who've spent years studying these people as well.
Se ci sono altre domande, altrimenti forse possiamo chiudere qui questo appuntamento. Thank you again, David Coulson, for being here. It's a great opportunity for us. Buonasera, grazie a tutti e il pubblico che è rimasto fino a questa sera con noi. Buonasera.